I don't know if anybody was in the chat ops discussion earlier, but a lot of the theme and towards the end, they're talking about DevOps being a journey. You're never actually there. You're never actually done. And once you are done, that's probably when you're doing it wrong. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about that journey and talk about a little bit how Quicken Loans is on that journey itself. So who am I? My name is Tyler Underwood. I'm a senior application engineer at Quicken Loans. Quicken Loans being a large financial organization, very complex infrastructure. A lot of complexity about it just in general. I really like Christmas suits. I like Christmas altogether. Not a big fan of cats, but I seem to be kind of surrounded by them. My sister's got multiple cats. Girls that I've dated always have cats. They just kind of haunt me, so that's some imagery there for you. The middle picture is just kind of, those are our name tags actually at Quicken Loans. So do things a little bit different there. We have a pretty cool culture, but that's not necessarily, I don't want to get too caught up with about me. I'm here to talk about how we're doing things at Quicken Loans, kind of that journey along the way, and then some vulnerabilities. I'll be a little vulnerable, talk about some areas that we have opportunity for, we'll use that word, and let's get things started here. So a couple things on the agenda. We're going to talk about value stream mapping. It's a pretty powerful exercise. If you're not familiar with it, I'll touch on that a little bit. We're going to talk about the three principles, the framework that was laid out in the Phoenix project by Gene Kim. We're going to talk about scaling DevOps in large organizations. So we do have a pretty large organization. I'm sure most of you guys here, I'm looking around the room, see some people that could probably relate. How to start that movement? What does it take? My talk is titled DevOps Champions Leading That Transformation. So what does it take to be a DevOps champion? And then, like I said, some common failures, some lessons learned, and then just kind of getting into that a little bit too. So getting into things, this is kind of what DevOps kind of looks like at Quicken Loans. So it's a common misconception that DevOps is developers and operations, and then you have DevOps, kind of bridging those together. Not necessarily the case. There's BAs, there's QAs, there's security, there's infrastructure, and that's kind of what this slide represents. So this is that value stream exercise that I was talking about. Really what this was it brought together all those people, all different walks of life of IT. It brought together BAs, it brought together quality assurance analysts, it brought together the security team, infrastructure, systems engineers. Literally anybody in IT that was representative of this issue that we had, brought them together in a room, and we did this exercise called value stream mapping. If you're not familiar with it, essentially what you do is you identify a problem. This is what this occurs from. You identify that you have an issue that you want to get solved. So in our case, it was the application creation process. So creating an application, getting that tested in a VM or something like that, getting that all the way through the environments, and actually deployed to tests or something like that. That process, current state, what we did was we mapped out current state. We estimated that it took about 2.5 months to do that. That was how our current state at Quicken Loans. So what we did was we got all these people together, we collaborated, and really this picture and this picture is what DevOps is to me. This is the best imagery I could find. I walked away from this 2.5-day exercise and said, you know what? That was DevOps. If I had no idea, never read the Phoenix project, never went to a conference on DevOps, that's probably the best way I could describe it. So you're looking here, you're seeing a couple different things on there. You're seeing pink sticky notes. The pink was we identified waste. So waste opportunities, whether that be waiting for somebody to give you information, whether that be waiting on a manual process. We identified in this value stream, mapping, that application creation process, that there's a lot of smart people doing a lot of really dumb things. And that's pretty much the only way I can put it. A lot of smart people clicking buttons at 12 o'clock at night. I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but that's waste. That's waste. There's room for that. So what do we do with those pink sticky notes? We said, can we automate this? Is this an automation opportunity? So we did. And that's what our future state was. We took that current state, we identified our pink sticky notes, and we said, is this something that can be automated? All the orange that you're seeing on there, that was representative of information that we needed to gather. So what we did was we said, hey, can we gather this information sooner? Because that was also some waste opportunities was, the networking team waiting on, the infrastructure team to provide whatever F5s they need or something like that, So there was a lot of waste there that we identified, and a lot of that was based on just not having the right information. So when we went through this value stream mapping, we started with current state, we identified what our future state was, And then we kind of iterated on that and talked about what made sense. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. This slide might look familiar. I believe Erica Morrison and Scott Pruitt used this earlier. I was looking at that, I was like, oh man, they used my meme. Not my meme, but. So this is a common thing that happens, and a lot of you guys can relate to this. And that's really where DevOps comes into play. You have developers, they throw something over the wall, it's an operations problem now, it worked. It worked on their machine, right? So you guys have all probably heard that before. We're gonna talk about some principles that kind of underline this issue itself, and that kind of bridge that gap so this doesn't necessarily happen as much. So a lot of this talk is going to be about the 3 ways, and if you guys aren't familiar with the 3 ways, it's the principles that underpin DevOps. And like I said, it's the framework that Gene Kim kind of laid out, and that was part of the Phoenix project. So what are those? It's systems thinking, so understanding the entire SDLC, from beginning to end. Amplifying feedback loops, so constantly giving feedback, constantly monitoring, constantly reporting. Having a culture of continual experimentation and learning, so constantly taking risks, learning from your failures, that kind of thing. So we're just going to hop right into them, and I'm going to go through each one. I'm going to talk about a few examples that we use at Quicken Loans, and try to give you guys some tangible takeaways that you can take back to your company tomorrow. I mean, you guys will all be here, I assume, tomorrow, but next week, and really start implementing these things. So systems thinking, what does this look like? Like I said, it's understanding the entire SDLC. So we talked about bugs, and if you understand everything from business requests to deploy into production, the likelihood of you implementing those bugs and having those bugs go downstream, if you understand the entire system, is it's lessened. So that's one of the benefits of systems thinking. Understanding your value streams. So your value streams could be anything from you have that actual business request to deploying to your environments, unit testing, all your different testing suites and procedures. That's what it means to kind of understand what your different value streams are and have that idea of systems thinking. I have pipeline up here. So treating that pipeline to production as a product. A lot of companies tend to miss the mark on this. They just think that, oh, I have this tool that can do this for me, and then they don't actually have much ownership of it. And there's not that sense of ownership of it. And I'll talk about that a little bit more too, about the power, when you give the autonomy to the developers, how much ownership they can really assume in that regard. So I'm going to give you guys an example here. So you're seeing a lot of boxes on the screens. Looks pretty, not complex. I made it a little bit simplistic, but essentially this was what it looked like to deploy code at Quicken Loans. So you have a deployment code request. You have a couple gateways because there's security measures. Then your code actually gets out to the cloud for that deployment request. Going back through the gateways, so back through those 2 gateways, then the code deployment actually kicks off. Going back to the gateways again, out to the cloud. So there's a lot of going through the gateways, going back and forth. So we took a step back, and this is, we were really working we were running before we were walking, essentially, during the times of Rocket Mortgage. I assume a lot of you guys have heard of Rocket Mortgage at Quicken Loans. It's the creepy girl that just whispers, Rocket, that girl. I don't know who that is, but I'd like to know. So we sped up a lot. We took a lot of time. We took a step back and we said, let's focus on stability. Let's apply some systems thinking here. Take a step back and take a higher view at what we could do better, because this is just taking way too long to deploy code. This was taking about an hour to do a basic .NET API deployment request. So we took a step back and we reevaluated it. So essentially what we were doing here is we still still have that deployment code request. We had a couple gateways still, just due to security. We couldn't really get around that. But we worked with security because security is our friend. Everybody likes security, right? But then what we did was we cached that artifact, or that deployable, in an S3 bucket. So we left it out there rather than throwing it out there, coming all the way back. So that deployable is already in the cloud. One gateway, code deployment kicks off, another gateway, and then out to the cloud. So some very high-level imagery, and if you guys want to talk about it later, I'd be happy to tell you about more of the intricacies of how that worked. But really, we just applied systems thinking. That's all it was. Took a step back and said, do we really need to go out to the cloud, back, and so on and so forth? So we really solved a lot from there. So what kind of tangibles was this? What did we actually get from this? We actually cut the deployment time down by 97% just by caching that artifact out in the cloud. So it went from 60 minutes to 3 minutes. So you can see how a lot of developers and operations would be pretty happy about that. some of you guys might be thinking, that, my organization's way too complex and you're very overwhelmed, just kind of like how Kobe is here too. I started thinking the same thing. It's a lot to understand, especially if you have a complex organization. Some ways that we've kind of applied the systems thinking and trying to like break it down a little bit into sections was we utilize enterprise architect team and solution architect team. So if you guys don't have those in place, definitely something that you could start to leverage. If you do have software architects, something you leverage as well, just to kind of help break up those business areas, so those value streams I talked about earlier. And it's not that you're isolating them to the one business area, but they can really help bridge those gaps about what all those business areas are and how those work together. So we talked about systems thinking. The second way of thinking is amplifying feedback loops. So I'm going to give an example of kind of what this looks like at Quicken Loans. So this is a dashboard. It's going to be hard to read, and you don't necessarily need to read all the different metrics. But what we did was we pulled out what the developers want to see. And we really talked about a few of the different metrics here. So amplifying feedback loops is really about giving that visibility, constantly giving that visibility, constantly reporting back to the developers, to operations, to anybody that wants to see it. So having a centralized dashboard where you can see the technical debt of an application, where you can see code coverage, stuff like that, code complexity. So these are all applications here on the screen. It tells you the technical debt and that kind of thing. So there's really a lot of value in this, especially with code coverage, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So in a scenario, you apply this amplifying feedback loops, right? You have that code coverage that's being monitored, that's being reported out. So a way that you can actually utilize this is identifying that if you have a code coverage of 98% of your code, you can deploy to beta. That's an automated thing. So you have CI in place that you deploy to test, and then it checks on that code coverage, calls that API on that dashboard, and it says, yep, this application has 98% or better of code coverage. Developer autonomy? I think so. That really provides a lot of empowerment and a lot of autonomy to the developer to say, you know what, I control where my code goes. And you can even push that through to production as well. I mean, I would like to think it would have to be 100% code coverage, but you guys can identify that in your own organization. So moving on with feedback loops. So there's, we talked about the monitoring and reporting side of things, but there's also, I think agile ceremonies fit into this a lot. We work on stand-ups. So every day we're constantly talking about what did we do yesterday, what did we do today, and what are you blocked on? So just really just reporting that back to your team, and always, it's an everyday thing. So you're amplifying that feedback of constantly reporting out what you're doing. So doing retros after every iteration, and then really focusing on the quality in that feedback. So not just saying, good job on, you're in a retro, and good job on that, whatever kind of development project you're working on. But really focusing on giving that quality feedback of, good job, here's some room for improvement, this is what you can do better next time, this is what you're currently doing good on, stuff like that, just really kind of focusing on that kind of stuff. The third way, continual experimentation and learning. So a lot of this is really about the risk reward. So constantly taking those risks, learning from your failures, moving on from those, and then, it's a practice of repetition. So constantly practicing, constantly taking risks, learning from your failures, and then moving forward from that. So what does that look like? So this is kind of a little bit of a paradigm that needs to be shifted. You'll see this a lot in organizations where developer takes the risks and they find a bug that does not get implemented into production. Typically, they're rewarded for that because they found a vulnerability that did not get into your client-facing site or whatever it is. Operations takes a risk, being so close to the client, and that actually gets implemented into live production. Probably not going to get necessarily rewarded for that. They might get reprimanded. I don't know. That's a paradigm shift that needs to kind of close, I guess. How can you do that? Really, what I've noticed at Quicken Loans, what I've really encouraged developers and operations, when I say operations, the infrastructure teams at Quicken Loans, is come closer together. So bridge that gap. So a lot of our developers are kind of acting as software architects. So those software architects they actually care what the infrastructure is. So if you go to a developer goes to a conference, they go to any developer conference, and they learn about the newest container system or something like that. They start developing that when they get back from the conference and try to implement that into production. It's probably not going to work. You really need to understand how the operations is actually doing their infrastructure. And likewise, operations needs to really understand how developers are developing. So once you bridge those gaps and you kind of understand how each one is working, that's when you can really have that synergy, and those two can kind of work together a lot better. So I was talking earlier about the iteration and the current state, future state of that value stream mapping. And a lot of you guys, I assume, have heard of this, Kaizen. So it's derived from the Japanese word Yoko Tenkai. And I'm going to say it's loosely translated to continuous improvement. It's a little bit different. I don't know if there's anybody that understands Japanese really in here, so if I got that wrong, I apologize. But we're going to roll with it. So really what this is it's about continually moving forward, iterating. And again, this is very similar to value stream mapping, but this is actually doing the action. You're actually implementing on something real time. So what this looks like is you orientate yourself with the issue at hand, because you're not gonna start doing this without having an issue. Orientate yourself with the future state. So identify your current state, and then you're gonna identify your future state. What you ideally would like to see this process be like. Then you actually make those changes on the fly. You're actually doing the development. You're doing the code. You're implementing different ways to deploy the code, like we were doing with our application creation process, as well as that deployment process that I identified. And then you evaluate your results, and then you orientate yourself again. And it's a continual loop. So you really got to allocate a couple days for this, and you got to bring in the right people to this room. So you can do this with something like a deployment process, like we identified. We said, you know what, let's try to go through these gateways instead. Let's cache the artifact in this S3 bucket. Does that work? Nope, that didn't really work. Or something like that. You just continually iterate on that. So it's really important when you're going through these that if you're doing any kind of manual tasks, do it more than 2 times, you got to automate it. And that's just a rule of thumb that I guess I said, I don't know. But you're going to burn yourself out if you try to do these Kaizens or the value stream mapping or anything like that, and you're doing a lot of manual tasks, because that's really what it is. It's all about that repetition. And it's important when you're going through this to identify what you want that outcome to be, what that success criteria is, and then iterate on that. Because you have to have, if you're wandering down a road and you don't have that end goal in mind, you're going to get lost. So if you identify what that success criteria is, what your outcome is of this, that's when you can really kind of push towards that future state. So to recap, systems thinking, understanding the entire SDLC. So something we did was the value stream mapping, amplifying feedback loops. So it's a lot about visibility. It's a lot about that monitoring and reporting and giving the development teams, the operations teams, leadership, everybody across the board, visibility into what you're doing. Having a culture of experimentation and learning. Quicken Loans does a great job at this because they have that culture of innovation. We identify 4 hours every week to take as just time for innovation. And you have that time on Monday from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. And you spend that time to just kind of work on whatever you want, whatever kind of new language or whatever you want to talk about. So just fostering that culture is very important. So a couple Antipatterns here. So I was actually on a DevOps team. We were the DevOps team. What that did, you have developers, right? The developers are in their own silo, and you guys have all heard this before. Operations is in their own silo. So you create that DevOps team, then you have a DevOps silo. So that was fun. Everybody just thought, nobody really knows what DevOps is yet. I'm trying to lead that transformation, lead that ideologies and those methodologies. But everybody's just like, oh, they're the build and release team. That's all they do. It's really more than that, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So it's really about creating a community. So community can have a couple different ways of thinking about it, but it's really bringing everybody together. So here's my fun little characters again. So bringing together the BAs, the QAs, security, system engineers, leadership, getting everybody on board with what this idea of DevOps is. So DevOps is not equal to one single team. So this is kind of what I talked about before. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be those methodologies, and it's got to be embedded in the organization. And you guys all know this stuff. Like if you've been to a DevOps conference before, you've heard all these things. So hopefully I can give you some tangibles to kind of take away. But But yeah, so everybody from developers to operations, as I talked about before with the risk reward, they need to understand how the other works. So I bring back to that the conference example. So developer goes to a conference, they bring back the containerized way to develop. It's not going to work unless you get operations on board. And then just having visibility into what everybody's doing, so creating those dashboards. It doesn't have to only be code coverage, but just visibility into what everybody's doing. Open up your GitHub repos. Open up your TFS orgs, whatever it is. Leadership buy-in is always important as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be the 3 ways. Those are it's kind of a framework. It's not going to directly, there is a DevOps handbook, but it's not always going to apply directly to your organization. So you kind of got to give your own twist to it. Sometimes, everybody's heard of legacy applications. Sometimes there's legacy people too, and I'm not talking about just old people. So the elder folk in the room, don't get offended by that. Legacy people meaning people that are kind of afraid of change, maybe. And by nature, some people just don't like change. Some of the benefits and success stories that you can outline to them and kind of lay that out and say, by practicing DevOps, by practicing these methodologies and the ideologies, this is what you can have. So that's kind of how you can kind of talk to some of the people that are apt to change. And again, I'm more than willing to talk to you guys about that because that's been the biggest roadblock for me, at least at Quicken Loans, is just people that don't see the value and people that are afraid to change. So DevOps equals build and deploy. I talked about this a little bit. No. Yes, DevOps is building, it is deploying code, but that's not all it is. So some other things that you could really touch on within that DevOps can kind of help handle, I guess, and something that you can bring back to your organization to say, like, we need to do this stuff, is really having, these DevOps champions or whatever they are, whatever you want to call them, kind of coach it on those best practices early. So if you're trying to implement DevOps and you say, all right, so you're now building your code, you're compiling your code, let's start doing DevOps now. You're really missing the mark. It's really got to start before that, and it's got to be the culture. You guys have heard that a million times probably today already. So really getting on there, coaching on best practices, test procedures that can allow for code coverage. I talked about that before. The application creation process that I talked about with the value stream mapping. So really gathering all that metadata on the front end, that's DevOps. Some IAC stuff, infrastructure as code. So doing the self-service provisioning, giving that autonomy to the developers to really spin up a VM when they want, and be able to test when they want. Yes, there are some risks that are along with that, but there's definitely some audit processes that can kind of be implemented with that as well. So a few final thoughts. The deployment strategy is very important, but it's not everything, because it's really got to start before that. So the CI/CD stuff is very important as well, and DevOps kind of, implementing these DevOps practices and procedures are really what bridges the gap between the developers and the operations, but there's a lot more that's in between that too. DevOps champions, also important. You need those evangelists, the evangelists that are going out, talking to development teams, talking to leadership, talking to operations. But if you need that buy-in too. You need the buy-in from all people across the organization. And I really like this. DevOps does not equal automation. Automation is the natural result of DevOps. So a lot of people think when they say DevOps, they think of just automating manual processes, which, yes, that is a lot of it, but that's kind of the result of implementing DevOps and implementing that collaboration, implementing that culture. So sources, recommended content. A lot of you guys have heard of the Phoenix Project. Very good book, very good novel about a journey in IT, journey within DevOps. So definitely read that or listen to that if you have not already. Any questions? And again, I'm more than willing, I have 38 seconds, so more than willing to chat with any of you guys. I knew through all the dry runs I was doing with Abigail that I was right at 25 minutes, so definitely open to chat with any of you guys. Whenever you see me around, just pull me aside. So anything from the crowd right now?
What was your biggest challenge? Transformation?
So still are transforming. Biggest challenge I would say was definitely the communication, the collaboration between developers and operations, and really just educating. It's a lot of education of what this is. So Quicken Loans is headquartered in Detroit. I work in Detroit, and a lot of these DevOps ideologies and methodologies, it's kind of a West Coast thing, I think. It's kind of like stemmed from here. You see all the conferences over here. It's slowly making its way over to Detroit, but it's getting people educated on what DevOps is and getting them away from those anti-patterns of thinking that DevOps isn't one team. DevOps is only building and deploying code. So it's stuff like that I think is the biggest challenge. And it's just that the communication and understanding how the collaboration works between the two.
So when you were doing your value stream mapping, were you at a point where your organization was different, or you no longer in silos, or you just brought people in from the different silos to do the value stream?
So that's exactly what it was. So the question was, when we were doing the value stream mapping, was it, did we break down the silos yet, or was that just kind of handpicking people from each silo? And that's essentially what it was. It really was the handpicking, and that really kind of started off this journey. It kind of kickstarted it a little bit, because I just kind of took a step back and I was looking that there's two DBAs over here, a security guy over here, and there's a lot of chatter and a lot of differing ideologies and a lot of strong personalities in the room. But just see everybody work together for one common goal. That's what DevOps was to me. So, yeah, Mark.
You originally said you were on the team DevOps.
Yeah.
How did your company come to the realization that they couldn't have a team called DevOps and that it was more of a cultural thing that
Yeah. So the question was, if you guys didn't hear it, I was on a DevOps team. We were called the DevOps team. How do we come to the realization that we shouldn't be that? I'll be completely honest. I said we should not have a DevOps team, and then we kind of split off. So it's that's the beauty. It's a little bit of both. It's a great thing, but it's also a little bit of a pain point, because I do have a lot of pull, I guess you could say, for starting that journey and doing those things like that. But at the same time, I am a little bit on my own right now. So getting people together, and I think DevOps isn't something that I need to sell to the company or sell to the organization. It's really something that we're doing a lot of things already, but just coming together and making everybody on board and everybody aware of what's really going on. I think I'm at time right now because this thing keeps flashing at me. Any other questions you guys have, again, feel free to come up to me. Tyler Underwood, feel free to message me on the app or hit me up on Twitter, handles up there. Thank you.